Hi everyone, and welcome to another workshop with Brian Putt. Brian is a decision quality consultant who helps organizations to make better decisions using probabilistic analysis. Now, Brian spent 25 years at Chevron, where arguably it's one of few companies in the world that really has the probabilistic decision making, decision quality, decision analysis, and risk management as part of their corporate DNA. So this is actually the third workshop that we will be doing with you, Brian, and I encourage everyone who hasn't watched the previous sessions to go back and watch the replays, watch the recordings of the previous sessions, so you can appreciate both the decision quality and some of the examples, the case study that we discussed in the previous sessions. So Brian, over to you. What do you have in store for us during this session?
All right, Alex. Well, we're taking on an even more difficult subject of value creation, value of information. And we're going to be, once again, using the SIPMath modeling tools that come from probability management. They're free, available to you if you just go to probabilitymanagement.org. So in the second session, we talked about the economics of a Greenfield project. We're going to briefly review the frame of that. In this session, however, we're going to talk about how to use SIPMath to evaluate the value of information. And the value of information is going to be defined as the difference between some reference case without information and the value with the information. So we need to really understand that. People talk about this and they wave their hands and they're really not clear, they're not quantifying what the value of information is. And so just quickly here, Alex, we're going to look at a Greenfield project. There are lots of different ways to evaluate, different ways to develop the project. We identified issues, we identified the decision hierarchy, and what I've done here is in red, I've added the decisions that we need to change our frame to look at value of information. So, should we drill an appraisal well to understand the size of the resource? We saw that the resource is really important in our tornado diagram, and so perhaps we can not only reduce some of the downside risk with an appraisal, but we might be able to improve the upside. So that's a win-win through the appraisal well.
Yeah.
We also need to consider the cost of the appraisal well and maybe deferral of the project and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. And just as we did in all the previous sessions, I want to point out, I mean, the value of information as the concept is hugely important. Because most of the time, what decision makers are discovering is that they want to make the decision, but uncertainty is very, very high. And additional costs may need to be spent to improve the information that the company has for making the decision. And it never is clear how much money is okay to spend to get better information. And you know, we can actually quantify that. We can make that decision easier by using some of the tools that we have.
Yeah, one of the problems you have with some of the subject matter experts is they feel like they have to give you a really very narrow range.
Yeah.
And they don't feel comfortable saying, well, we need more information so I can reduce my range. Well, if the range reducing the range doesn't change the decision, there's no value in gathering that information, because almost always there's some cost of gathering information. So let's move on. In the strategy table here, we had to add another decision, which should we obtain information? We have to say yes or no. So our reference case in this case would be no, we're not going to gather the information, and that's what we want to compare against. Okay, and then there's the question: should we develop it? We'll see how that changes with information. And then once again, the processing size, we're really going to treat as being continuous and not discrete, but we've characterized it here in the strategy table as being discrete, but it's really going to be continuous. So here is kind of a favorite slide of mine to explain what the value of information is. It's kind of a balance scale, and you want to look at which has got higher value with information over here or without the information. And an important point is there can only be value of information if there's a change in my decision policy. So once again, if I don't change my decision, then there could be no value of information. It doesn't mean I have to change it all the time. I may just change it some of the time. Okay? And then the information can either be perfect or imperfect. And so in this particular model, this Greenfield model, we're going to get information about the resource. And what we're going to ask the subject matter experts to do is to identify whether it's kind of in the lower third, the middle third, or the top third. And these thirds actually overlap a little bit, okay? And so then based on what they believe, based on the appraisal well, because it's never really perfect, we can decide whether to develop or not, and then decide the size, the capacity, if we see that particular segment. This is this indicator segment 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm. So the previous example, just to highlight to everyone who's listening to us, and by the way, we always encourage to ask questions, have communication, have conversations just between the participants as well as us. This is basically setting up some sort of ground rules for making a decision. If it happens, if experts say X, then we're probably going to make a decision no. If experts say Y, then we will consider going ahead, but we will be more conservative in our approach. And if it goes into the third segment, the experts say yes, then we will have a bigger project, essentially. This is what this is saying.
Right. And then, so in this particular decision policy, we don't develop if we think it's a low resource.
Yeah.
If it's a middle resource, in the middle of the range, we develop 56,000 barrels a day. And if it's a high resource, it's 77,000 barrels a day.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the influence diagram also gets changed because before we didn't have this resource indicator. And we didn't have this decision whether to obtain information. So now the results of this resource indicator impact the decisions on whether to develop the facility type and the size. And there's something called Bayesian probabilities where you reverse some things. So the indicator also is impacting the distribution of the resource size. Now the overall resource size is going to stay the same, okay? But if the indicator comes up one or the other, it will shift that curve one way, left or right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So those are the changes there. Value measures are important, and there's a number of them. What I'd like to do in this video is to talk about profitability index, and profitability index is the ratio of NPV divided by the discounted capital. And I think it's a better metric than NPV, which is oftentimes used, because NPV is really a measure of how big something is. And so unless you make NPV at a discount rate, which is really your hurdle rate, and not some indicator,
mm-hmm.
It tends to push people to bigger and bigger projects, which is really not what you want. And so this profitability index brings together both the NPV and the capital to give you a good answer. And we talked about that in the video too, which once again, we encourage people to go back and look at.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to stick with the profitability index in this video.
Mm-hmm.
There were forces for and against the larger field. We've reviewed these before, but this value of information, by using value of information, can possibly support both perspectives. In other words, hey, when the resource is small, we don't develop. When the resource is large, we develop something bigger. The question is, how much bigger is it? And is it really worthwhile not to develop the small resource? It depends upon the fiscal terms and the oil prices you're assuming and everything else. So there's not a standard answer here, okay? That's why we have to do the analysis. Don't guess, just do the work, okay?
Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, is a little rule I now have in my family, is don't second guess. And I mean, this goes out there to decision makers and decision support analysts and the risk managers. Don't guess. Whatever you're guessing in your mind is probably off. Just do the calculation and you will see whether it will support or contradict your hypothesis.
Yeah, well, your mind has always got these biases in it. There's different types of biases. And so by doing the analysis properly with uncertainty, you can minimize those biases.
Yeah, and it's, this goes so much beyond large oil and gas, multi-billion-dollar investment projects. I was literally yesterday trying to decide the place for daughter's 6th birthday, and we had like 7 options to choose. Did a simple table, compared different options, did like a very simple scoring methodology. The answer became immediately obvious, kind of beyond any reasonable doubt. We just went, okay, this seems like the best option, which wasn't obvious before.
Absolutely, and I think that goes back to video 1, which people might want to look at first if they haven't seen that, because we talked about tailoring decision analysis to the problem size. Not everything has to be a 3-month exercise or longer. In this case, it was probably an hour exercise at most, and hopefully you included your daughter in some of the value measures.
Yeah, right.
All right. So, characterizing this resource is critical. And so what we have said here is we've taken the actual resource, which is shown here in the black, which was a log normal. We kind of talked about this before. And then we had these 3 segments which were defined by percentiles of the log normal. We made them into triangulars. And then we added them together probabilistically and they came up with the green line. You can see that's the green line's a very good representation of the log normal. So the reservoir engineers are going to want to see that. But you can see that this, if I think I'm on segment 1, then I'm actually believe I'm going to be on this red line, okay, or the blue line or the green line in segment 3. So adding these up probabilistically gives you this solid green line. And there are multiple ways to characterize this. I'm not saying you have to do it this way. There's lots of different ways, but you need to somehow understand that when you do an appraisal well or any type of value of information, it's not like a flag goes up and says, hey, red or green or yellow. It's going to have to be numeric somehow. So you need to think about how you're going to actually evaluate these things. All right. So how might information impact the optimal decision policy? So what is a reference case for value in VOI, value of information? Well, it has to be, what is the best option? What is your best option without the information? So I always like to use this example about a refinery. You know, they're trying to make some improvement to the refinery and say, well, if this particular part of the refinery goes down, the refinery goes to 0, and therefore replacing this part is worth X amount. No, 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 that's not your best option. If that particular part of the refinery goes down, you would simply make different quality of products or something else. You would have an ongoing operation. That becomes your reference case. So it's really important to pick the right reference case, and if people are trying to, you know, bias the results, they'll pick a reference case which is really poor, and you need to make sure that they pick the right reference case.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, before you do a VOI analysis, because you've got to go through and assess these probabilities and other things, you may want to ask the question, what is the value if I have perfect information? Because oftentimes that's just taking an uncertainty and moving in front of a decision. Mm-hmm. So calculate the value of perfect information. If that has value, okay, meaning you change some decisions, then it makes it worthwhile to do the value of imperfect information. Remember, perfect information also assumed that you had to pay for that information in some manner. So perfect information is not always going to add value because of the cost. And then this third bullet, discounted resource. Oh my goodness. Well, I guess you would never want to really do it on resource. You want to do it on some sort of economic metric. And then once you've identified perfect information as having value, how does imperfect information change? And then how does the concession life in this particular case impact the optimal decision policy? Whether we'll do that or not, I'm not sure, but the model certainly has the capability of doing that. But that could be, if one of the issues, one of the questions you might have is, should I be renegotiating contract life? That always comes up. And then it becomes a question of, well, do I assume that we will get a contract extension or not? And that becomes really an executive level decision whether you should do that or not. Oftentimes they don't want to assume that. Let's assume kind of the worst case scenario, we don't get the contract extension, what should we be doing? So we've added uncertainty in this conceptual model here, but we haven't added the value of information. You can see that all the decisions here are in front of, to the left of all the uncertainties. All right? Now, when I do the value of information tree, I've brought this segment indicator in front of the decisions to develop in the capacity. And I've added this other decision over here to gather information. So in my reference case, I don't gather information. I have to make a decision whether to develop or not. And then I have all my uncertainties. With information, I get to make different decisions. So you have to think about these two, this number one is being here, here, and here, where I can make different decisions on capacity. So we have if you watch the second video, we had a dashboard. This is the expanded dashboard where we've now said, for depending upon the indicator, I will now make separate decisions whether I develop or not develop. Let's move over to the model move over to the model, Alex, and we'll start playing with this a little bit. Okay? All right, here we go. So this is the same dashboard. This goes down here a little bit. But what I've done is split my screen, so there's a couple of graphics here which I think are really important we'll look at so we can understand the value of information. And right now, the model is set up where I am probabilistic. I'm using a 0.3 PI, but I'm not testing. And in the second video, Alex, we determined that the 49,000 barrels a day was the optimal decision. And you can see this is the active case. And in these two graphs, the two lines line up perfectly. We've kind of stored that reference case so we can do a comparison. All right? So now, let's add the testing, okay? Now, let's assume initially, let's just do a little bit of sensitivity analysis here. Let's assume that we always develop, but we develop smaller when it indicates small and bigger when it indicates large. And 49, I guess, is kind of the mid. So that works out pretty well. So Alex, now what if we take our model here and we include a test? The model includes a cost for that test, by the way. But we don't have to get into the details of that. Let's just look at the value of information.
Yeah.
And we can do that. Oh, before I do that, we're going to look at perfect information. So remember those segments I showed you, 1, 2, and 3. We're going to be perfect on picking those things out. So with perfect information, we do the testing. Yes. And we can see how these graphs changed a little bit. So now the red lines are different from the black lines. The black lines represented our reference case without information, and the red lines are the active case. Now we might ask, oh, so let me do an F5 go to results, okay? And I'm going to copy that. I'll copy it over here. So this is now with perfect information. Now the question might be, well, what if I didn't develop this one? I just said no. And once again, we're running 1,000 simulations here. Well, what does it mean to not develop the small segment? That means I don't spend a lot of capital other than the cost of the test, by the way, Alex. And so now we find out, if we looked at this optimized variable, it went from, originally deterministic, or not deterministically, but with no information, we had 132. And then when we developed everything, we went to 224, and now we're up to 324. So we'll store that one. What I've done here, Alex, is I've just taken that vector of results and the inputs and given it a range name. And so it's easy to get to and then paste it in here so I have these for comparison.
Sure.
So now, it makes sense that we wouldn't develop the low resource, but you might want to ask the question, well, what if we did, maybe we shouldn't develop the mid one either, so we could just do that. 144, that doesn't make any sense. I don't think we even need to store that one. That doesn't make any sense to me. So we'll put that back to yes. And you'll notice that once again, SIPMath, the way it's structured, because it has random variables that are unique to every uncertainty, you always come back to the same answer. So once again, I'm back there to the 324.8. So now we might, just for kicks, let's go over.
Let's try what happens if we have imperfect information.
I'll tell you, Alex, let's go look at the slide. I think I need to explain what does imperfect information mean, because it may not be clear to everybody. I think I have a slide over. I think I have a slide over here on this. What is the difference between perfect and imperfect information? So with imperfect information, if the reality was segment 1, going back to that resource curve I showed you, then there's a 100% chance that I would interpret it as being resource 1. For segment 2 and segment 3. Whoops, excuse me. With imperfect information, it says if reality is segment 1, I would interpret it as being segment 1 75% of the time. 20% of the time I would think it's segment 2, and even 5% of the time I think it was even segment 3, even though in reality it was segment 1.
So let's play a game. Who is the first person in the comments to write error 1, error 2, which is essentially what this is?
Oh, they just can't write error 1, error 2. They need to define what those mean. Okay? That's where it becomes challenging. Okay.
That's a great idea. Write it down and define which one is which.
Right. So, and that becomes a lot more difficult when you get more. In here we've got 3 outcomes, not just 2. So error 1 and error 2 become more difficult to define when you have 3 outcomes. And doing it this way, you can have 3 segments, you can have 4 segments, whatever you want, and it doesn't have to be symmetrical as well. You could have just 2 outcomes, and it will work as well, because you can invert Bayesian matrices that are not square. Okay, but it's really important when assessing these probabilities that you ask the question, given that the reality is X, segment 1, what is the probability that you would see segment 1 or segment 2 or segment 3? And these have to add up to 100. So by looking at this, it tells me they will be much more comfortable when it's in segment 1, because they're saying there's 75% of the chance they're going to see it in segment 1. Whereas if in reality it's segment 3, there's only a 50% chance. So they're kind of a risk adverse. They don't really want to say that it's going to be a really high outcome.
Yeah.
Even then, what the indicator says it is.
Yeah.
So
they don't want to celebrate too early.
Well, they don't want to get a bad reputation either. Remember these these folks are always they have their own biases. They want to be, if they're subject matter experts, they want to be right. They don't want to be shown wrong.
Sure thing.
Okay, so let's come back to this model again. All right. So now you ask the question, what if we looked at imperfect information Oh, yeah,
It changed.
it changed. Okay. It changed so fast I didn't even see it. So does that, okay, so it went down, it dropped 100, or, more than a third.
Mm-hmm.
And was pretty close to the, pretty close to this situation where we developed everything. We didn't store these results down here, which is too bad. We should have stored these results.
Well, let's do it now. Just put it next to it.
Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to do a concatenate that and this and this. How about that? Now, that kind of tells me the story. It was no, yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we did, whoops, there at least be a value there. And this was the same thing, and this was a yes, 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 I believe, right? But these are the things the analyst is going to do is he works them on. He's going to say, I want to explore this area and so forth, and he's going to be constantly modifying the model.
Mm-hmm.
This is just part of the process, and that's what we're doing today is some real analysis. Okay. So this was imperfect information. So I think it's pretty clear here that, if I was to, maybe I should be increasing this to 70,000 barrels a day. Okay? Let's see what happens then. See, that went up. Right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. But so this could take a long time trying to optimize this whole thing. So what we really want to do is we'd like to be able to optimize this. And we want to do this, I'm assuming we're trying to do this with a low-cost budget without buying a ton of software. We're using SIPMath, which is free. So let's try to use Solver. So Solver is over here. Solver. And let's optimize initially. We're going to optimize value creation. But let's optimize, right, first of all, optimizing on the mid indicator resource, okay? So we'll solve that. Now, if you had more robust optimization software, you could actually optimize on the segment 2 and segment 3 resource at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, because we're using Solver, which comes with Excel, no additional cost, we're going to optimize them independently because there's really no interaction. I mean, either I'm going to get segment 2 or I'm going to get segment 3. And so when this one finishes, we're going to optimize
so
on
what you're trying to determine is, given the imperfect information, given the uncertainty, if it happens to be in segment 2, what's the optimal capacity?
Correct. That's correct. There we go. We've got an answer. So it says that segment 2 should be 59.19.
56.19, yeah.
56.19, thank you. And so then we can go over here to Data Solver. And now with that information, let's change this one now, okay? Because we don't want to just optimize on one. We'll say solve. And so when we finish optimizing on both of those, we'll have a nice answer. And I feel fairly comfortable that it's going to be higher than this 327 we had. We're already higher at 241.
Mm-hmm. And what's the number for value of information, which is our Greenfield? What does that mean? What does it mean when it's higher or lower?
Good question. Good question. Well, we've defined the criteria
Mm-hmm.
of a 0.3 pi, which means that if I had capital of $1 billion that I was spending, I would expect to have an NPV equal to 300. So it's the ratio of NPV to the discounted capital.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so what we're trying to do is we'd like to have NPV higher than whatever that criteria is. That's our hurdle rate.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, doesn't matter what kind of an industry you're in, all the opportunities don't come to you at the same time. You've got to make individual decisions. And so it's important for the company to have a criteria to know when to say yes to a project.
Yep. And usually it's IRR.
Well, yeah, but IRR is something it's very difficult to optimize to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because of the nature of the curve. If you have an IRR calculation, you really want to say, okay, let's say it was 15%, then you'd want to optimize on NPV 15, not NPV 10, okay? Because that, and so that works if IRR is really your constraint, but oftentimes you've got a capital constraint. And so you need to look at that and ask the question. And no matter what value measure you decide to use, I personally think the capital investment efficiency chart is the right way to look at this, because it allows you to compare the NPV and the capital. We're going to do that in just a moment here, Alex.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let me go here. Let me capture these results as well. Hey, where did we end up here? We ended up at 244. And so actually these guesses our initial guesses of 50 and 60 weren't too bad. We went up to 56 and 77 when we optimized everything.
Mm-hmm.
But this is with imperfect information. Yeah. So even though the value creation, but let's tell you what we're going to do, Alex. Let's make an investment efficiency chart, a capital chart here, and we'll just get rid of some zeros here so we can see what we're looking at. Okay. So what we want to plot, even though we've optimized on value creation, we're going to plot NPV 10. So we're going to take. I'll tell you what. We can include this one here, this one was the no information. We'll plot that one as well. Okay. So we'll plot all of these guys here. And we'll do an insert XY graph. Always use XY graphs, folks. And then we're going to go to chart design, select data, edit, and then I want to pick up my capital, which is this kind of capital right here. Okay. Let's see if that's right. How far do I need to go? Okay. And then we might want to just make it easier here. We'll make this, let's say 600. That's the advantage of the XY graph, is I can really manage what I'm looking at here. All right. So we could add some titles. We could have changed these titles up here to do things. Let's see. Let's put in this 1.3 DPI, right? Let me get rid of my split screen for a second here.
Mm-hmm.
And down here, I have I'm going to add these numbers. I'm going to make a line out of this, so it plots.
Mm-hmm.
We'll go back down to chart design, select data. We'll add, we're going to add a PI line, PI hurdle, let's call it that, okay? And the X values are these two, and the Y values are these two here. Okay, okay. And I'll click on this, right click on that, and I can say change series chart type, combo. Oh, here we go. PI hurdle wants to be a line. So now we can see, and what you asked about the definition of value creation,
Mm-hmm.
let me once again change this format, this axis, so it looks a little bit better. And we want to make this, ooh, what's it doing? Maximum of 29. Well, why is it showing 55 then? I don't know.
Maybe because the line is 5,000.
It should still be. Let me change this to 3,000, see what happens. There we go. I don't know why it was doing what it was doing, okay? That's, sometimes you just got to work through all that, right? All right. So now the value creation, this number we're optimizing to right here is 244, is the distance between this value and the red line if I just go vertical. So that's really an NPV number. Value creation is a form of NPV.
Mm-hmm.
And in our case, this is really an NPV 10 type of number.
Mm-hmm.
That's the NPV 10 above the red line, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll tell you what we can do here. Why don't we put some numbers? We'll just put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, one of the things that people often want to do is they want to label all this stuff. So what I can do is I can come over here, click on the series, right-click, add data labels. Then I click on the series, right-click again, format the data labels. And then I can pick values from cells, and I can select these numbers. I don't want the Y values. I'll show that. Oh, I need to say okay, R1, yeah. Okay. Then I can turn that off and that off.
Mm-hmm.
And then I should be good. All right. So value 6. You see how 6 is way over here? It's
Mm-hmm.
got a really high number, although 3 looks really good, right? 3 looks really good, but remember, that was probably perfect information.
It was.
It was. So we can very rarely get perfect information from our appraisal row. So the difference between this 3 and that 6 represents the value lost, the value creation lost by going to imperfect information. And
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that we didn't optimize this perfect information, by the way, I don't think. If we had optimized this perfect information, this probably would have been way higher. This
Much
3
higher.
would have moved up here. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. So now that we've got this value creation and we've optimized it, let's come down here again. Let me get rid of this formatting. Don't need that. And let's come back and look at these. Okay, we'll just put that over there. And then we can split our screen again. And we'll come back down here a bit. There's a lot of charts in this model. Remember how we talked about improving the downside and the upside? We talked about that early on in the presentation. And so our reference case with no information is that black line. And you can see that we've reduce the downside. There's a, you know, all this is reduced downside here, going from the black to the red.
Mm-hmm.
And that would increase the upside. We've increased the upside because we were able to go to a larger facility.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. When we saw that there was a big upside, because in our reference case we were at 49, and in our even in our imperfect information, when we see the big side, it's 77. That gives us the upside here. And if you're NPV oriented, kind of the same answer. I've reduced the downside and I've increased the upside.
Yeah. And when you say you reduce the downside on NPV, for example, chart, I mean, this is just for everyone who's watching, the likelihood of negative NPV decreased from 20 to 10, so halved, and the likelihood of positive NPV almost doubled as well.
Absolutely. And this is a really good point here, Alex, that don't be afraid to show these S-curves to your decision makers, because they're going to look at them and see them differently or ask questions around them. Well, the argument I get from most consultants is, well, the decision makers don't understand this. And my response is, well, take 15 minutes and educate them. You know, they're smart people. This is not rocket science to interpret what these curves mean, particularly if you explain it and say, hey, look, this vertical line here is a chance that I think it's a low indicator. That's segment 1. Now, the reason it's not the probabilities we saw before is because we used the Bayesian we inverted the Bayesian matrix, and it comes up with different probabilities. I think that's probably another subject, although the model does actually calculate the Bayesian matrix, inverts it.
Yep, exactly.
So explaining these S-curves and showing those results will really improve your credibility as an analyst, will help the decision maker understand the value of information, or see what the value is coming from. I think we have another chart down here. Let's go down here. I think we have another chart we wanted to talk about. Yeah, here we go. Now this one is, you don't see this very often, to be very honest, because it almost has to be done with Monte-Carlo. But it characterizes where the information is coming from. In other words, we say, in fact, we didn't actually calculate the value of information here, did we? Let's see. Let's calculate the value of information someplace. Okay, let's put the value of information right down here. So the value of information is equal to my value here less my base case. Remember, my base case here was no information at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I want to hold this constant, so I'll hit an F4 here and hold that constant. I can copy that across. So the value of information is worth 112 NPV above the 0.3 PI line. That's how much it's worth.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite a bit.
Can we somehow make a connection to how much the company is willing to spend to get the extra information? Not from this maybe, but in general?
Well, I think you can. I think you can, because where's our investment efficiency chart? It's up here. So here's our investment efficiency chart. Let me make this a bit bigger here for you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about this. Actually, let's get rid of the split screen again. And then we'll come down to our chart.
Yeah, go.
Where is it? Oh, is it up? Okay. There we go. Okay. So, one is no information, right? Where I developed everything, and I developed it with 49. And I spent a total Yeah, I guess I can just point to that number there, and I spent 2.7. So by getting the information, I went with imperfect information, I went to 6. So I reduced my capital, but I lowered my NPV. Now, I don't really have any other characteristics. I don't have any other imperfect. Oh, this is imperfect. Oh, this is, okay, 5, I could compare 5. And so 5 takes less capital. Okay, maybe this gets to your point, Alex. 5, option 5, which is less than optimal for value creation, takes less capital than 6. And so if I was really capital constrained, if I was willing to give up this much NPV, I should do 5 to save this much capital.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But what we can see, and this is another way to think about this, if I draw a line, I'm going to draw a line that's just perpendicular, parallel to this, okay? No, that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to hold the shift key down. It's parallel to this. And I take this line and move it up to what was it was 5? Yeah, 5.
Yep.
Bring it right through 5. You can see how 6 is just above that line. So 6 has got a better PI. It's adding value relative to 1.3 DPI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but it's not much. It's not much. So, if capital was important to you, I think moving to 5 would be fine. You know, or you could optimize this thing with a capital constraint in there. Say, I don't want to spend more than 2.1 and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could do that as well. So this analysis is something that, you know, kind of evolves. It's not like you can start at the beginning and say, well, this is exactly what I'm going to do, and it's done. You're going to learn things. You're going to come up with hybrid solutions as you work through it.
Mm-hmm.
So any other questions that you might have, Alex? We're going to pick up some questions from the participants as well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So if I come back here to this presentation, I just want to repeat that this value of information is not an easy subject, and you're going to have to spend some time talking to the decision makers about it, particularly if you show them a distribution of the value of information. Now, if they're just accepting to that, and maybe they're accepting to it because that's the answer they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Should I drill the appraisal well? Yeah, you better come back with an answer of yes. But in the case of an oil industry, if you drill a whole bunch of appraisal wells, when do you stop? You've got to have some criteria for when do you stop rather than just some gut reaction. I'd like to also point out that this analysis could be conducted with discrete outcomes and with traditional decision trees. I think using the SIP math approach is not that difficult and is very economical from a software perspective. And the other thing I'd like to point out is the SIP math models can be shared with other people, with the subject matter experts. They can go in and plug in different numbers and try it out themselves. Oftentimes with other decision tree software packages, the model or the results are not transferable to other people unless they also have the software and they understand how to use it.
Mm-hmm.
The other point is that other monte-carlo software, such as At Risk or Crystal Ball, could be used for this, but they're not going to be as interactive as I've shown you here. You would have to go through some other gyrations, plus you'd have to get the graphics I'm talking about. You'd have to do some special things. We haven't really generated any graphics here, but my YouTube channel shows how to do that, and it's quite easy to do with SIP math. It's almost automatic. If you want a chart, it's really easy to generate.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hope this session has helped people, and
I'm sure it did. The kind of the key takeaway for me was that often decisions have to be made under uncertainty, and one of the downsides of using proper decision science is that we come back to the decision makers saying, well, there's actually a range. And the typical response from many decision makers is that, well, the range is too big, so you're not helping me. So you've done the risk analysis and it's not helping me because it's just saying the range is too big. But that's the reality. At the stage of information that we are in right now, that's the best we can do, is a huge range. And then the right response should be, well, then maybe we should invest in getting better information before we make the final decision. Making a final decision based on this lacking information is not good quality decision making. We should not make the decision now. We should wait until we research and find out more. But that's not how humans behave. Instead, they say, oh, I'm going to go with my gut because your risk analysis tells me it's too uncertain. I mean, I can't make sense of it. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense to me. But this is what people do. They say, you've done the risk analysis. Your risk analysis shows that the decision is highly uncertain and you shouldn't probably take it right now. And the person goes, fine, I'm going to trust my gut on this then, because my gut is supposedly better than the analysis. But that's not what it's all about. I mean, this session that Brian just showed you is very powerful. It's actually explaining that if your initial analysis shows that the information is missing, then you can actually calculate how much it will improve your decision if you get that information. And when you present, again, don't make any assumptions, just present it back to the decision makers and say, are you sure you don't want to spend $1,000 to get a 50% improvement in the decision quality? And everybody will say, of course we do. It's nothing. Why don't we? I mean, I'm making up the numbers, obviously. But that's
I think the point I make back to the decision makers, okay, it may be too wide. Maybe this distribution, whatever criteria you're using, is too wide for me. I want you to reduce this downside further. You can say, well, what decision would you be willing to change? Would you be willing not to develop the mid-size indicator, right?
Yeah.
Well, we can do that, but what's going to happen is it'll get rid of this downside, but it's also going to get rid of some of the upside, and your value is going to go down. So unless they're willing to change their decisions, getting in additional information does not improve the analysis because the reality stays the same. Information doesn't change the reality.
Absolutely.
So you have to change the decision. That's a fundamental thing about value of information.
Which brings us to another very important point. It's all about trade-off. Right. And it's always about the trade-off between something and something. Time and money, cost of information and certainty. It's always a trade-off. And we have to come to a stage where we make decisions not do or not do, but make decisions in the context of a trade-off between something and something.
That's right. That's right. Well, and that trade-off, I think, oftentimes, I think particularly in the oil industry, and probably in other industries as well, it's how much investment do I need to make versus how much NPV10 or some other value measure I'm going to make. And this particular graph has been very valuable to Chevron in having a discussion and talking about what's important. I can convey that it was a few years ago, I had one of these charts, and I think I had 3 or 4 dots on, not this many, only 3 or 4 dots. Mm-hmm. I had all the senior management from that operating company there, and we spent 15, 20 minutes talking about 4 dots. And it was just unbelievable, how much dialogue that just generated, trying to understand why did the PV investment go down? Why did the NPV go up? And the pluses and minuses of all these different alternatives. So this could be a real good chart to stimulate dialogue. Remember, decision analysis is about the dialogue. If you don't have dialogue around it, we've missed the point. We need to get alignment of all the decision makers. In this case, if you're working with joint venture partners, you need to have joint venture partners as well aligned.
Yeah. So I hope this session was powerful to you. I mean, you obviously realize none of this is as powerful as a heat map with 3 different colors, but we've tried our best.
It's not as invaluable. I would say much more valuable.
It's, you know, I thought I'll finish with a joke. I hope many people get. I mean, I'm guessing that if you're watching this this session, you already watched many others, and you get it. But it's not about risk management, decision making. It's not about heat maps. It's about something entirely different. So hopefully you found this valuable. And remember, just don't be shy. Decision science, decision analysis, risk management is not for shy people. Ask questions. If something is unclear, just write it underneath this video, and we'll get back to you. I mean, we'll collect all the questions, and we'll get back to you in one way or another. So make sure you ask questions and have the conversations about this, because I mean, this is what some companies have been doing for decades. And it significantly changed and improved the way they make decisions. It's about time, I think, the general industry kind of starts doing it. Oil and gas in general is pretty high up there on the maturity ladder. It usually applies some of the, I mean, oil and gas pharmaceuticals are usually using kind of the state-of-the-art techniques for doing many things. It's about time we borrowed it into other industries as well.
And let's not forget, Alex, that this applies not just to the big projects, but to littler projects. And, as in your example of figuring out your daughter's wedding site, personal problems or decisions that need to be made, and they can be scaled back to a few hours.
Yeah, but the value of information is exactly the same. I mean, we were literally choosing the venue for the birthday. And the value of information for us was, well, we had to drive to the town nearby to look at the place in real life and not just the pictures on the website. Should we make the investment? I mean, it's 10 euros on petrol. Shall we spend half an hour of our time? It's the same trade-off. But the value of information, once you understand it, will significantly improve your decision making. Then you go ahead and do it. Thank you, everyone. See you in the next sessions with Brian.
Okay. Bye, everybody.